Hi, I'm Anne.
And I'm Paul, and welcome to Out of Place, where we speak with the ones who are challenging the status quo, leading from curiosity, doing things differently, and above all, have felt out of place somewhere along the way.
We've got real stories, honest lessons, a few laughs, and maybe some tears along the way from people who've been there, are there, or just getting started.
You are exactly where you need to be. Let's get into it.
Today's guest is Christopher, aka Dr. X, Vice Principal at St. Aidan's College in England, an athlete, scholar, activist whose ethos is rooted in equity, diversity, inclusion, and love, or EDIL. Christopher is from Houston, Texas, and from a big basketball family, including his twin brother. A former professional basketball player across Europe and the US, Christopher also completed as a scholarship athlete in the States and at Durham University, where he now volunteers with Team Durham to mentor the next generation. Academically, Christopher completed a PhD in sociology and social policy, with research focused on race and ethnic inequalities in higher education through an intersectional lens. Beyond research, he is the creator of Flippin' and Vibin', a brand and podcast called the Rehumanisation Station, dedicated to exploring how we dehumanize and rehumanize ourselves and our communities.
So, Chris, it's lovely to have you here. And this is actually the second opportunity we've had to be on a podcast together. A while back, maybe about 6 months ago, I was on your podcast, like Anne just mentioned, Flippin' and Vibin'. So we're really excited to be interviewing today, and can't wait to get into some questions with you.
Yeah. Thank y'all for having me. I'm excited too. Our episode was really good. If you want to tune in to Paul and I's episode, it's on the Rehumanization Station. Platform is on Spotify, Buzzsprout, and YouTube. You can see the video and the audio. But yeah, I'm excited too. We've had conversations, and it's good to kind of be on the other side as well. See how it goes. But I appreciate y'all having me on for sure.
Yeah, so a bit of background about Chris and I is we both come from a professional background in basketball, and I'm from Durham, the UK, which is the university where Chris works at, and I left Durham, I think, just the year before you arrived there for your scholarship. If I remember correctly, I think that's right.
Pretty sure that's right. I was like, it was 2014, 2015. I think that was the year. It's about a decade ago.
Yeah, which is crazy. So yeah, I left Durham and moved over to Australia, and I remember hearing a lot about you and a lot of what you brought to not just the basketball program there, but also the university. And obviously you've continued beyond the basketball. You've gone into academia. You now work at one of the colleges at the university, like I mentioned. So really looking forward to getting into some questions with you today. So just one thing I want to ask to kick us off. In your bio, it mentioned Dr. X. So I just want to start with that. What does that represent to you? Why do you go by that?
Okay, yeah. So I always start with the question. My last name is Jones, right? So my name is Christopher Jones. But if people know what Jones represents, I'm African American, but I consider myself Black African who happens to be American. But does anybody know where Jones stems from? I know we talked about this, right? So when I ask people, okay, where does the name Jones stem from? It's a Welsh. Yet I'm not Welsh, right? So historically, my ancestors were stripped from their names and given names from their slave owners, aka abusers is what I call them. So when doing my research, learning more of my history, a lot of Afro scholars like myself tend to want to rewrite our own story. So we want to go back to move forward, if that makes sense. So it's about understanding our history to move forward and do things differently, or do things the way our ancestors did them, right? So X is just filled in right now for Jones. I cross out my name Jones and I put X because eventually I'm going to change my name. And it's going to be Taye because I'm actually engaged now, and I'll update y'all now. I'm engaged now, so newly engaged, and we're going to change our names to Taye. So Taye is a West African name representing twins. So my partner and I agreed that we're going to change it to that. So soon it might be Dr. Taye, but as for now, Dr. X is my is what I go by.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. We just got tattoos as well. Like, we're still covered up. We just got them last night,
no.
so
No way.
Yeah, we got on the ring finger. So, but it's still covered up. I put a K there for Katia. She has a C. So, yeah, doing grown up things now, I guess, or whatever you want to call it.
Exactly. And just a huge congratulations to you and Cartier on the engagement.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a nice little segue into the question I have for you, because in your bio we talk about equity, diversity, inclusion, and love. And I find that your approach to changing both your names and tattoos and taking life a little bit differently to other people. Tell us a bit more about EDIL and what that actually means.
So when we talk about, people tend to use the term equality, diversity, and inclusion, right? I look at it as equality is something that everyone has equal access, right? But if we understand historically and we understand in present times, we all don't have the same resources and opportunities. There's barriers built in place for certain people, and certain people are born into situations that necessarily, they're not provided those resources, right? So I look at equity, and a clear example is what I say is that if we're in a room and we have to leave, if I'm missing a pair of shoes, and I need a pair of shoes to go outside, it's cold or whatever you want to call it. It's always cold in England, ain't it? So I need something, and we're like, if we're going to try to get Christopher shoes, am I going to get the same size shoes? And I don't know what size shoes you wear. I wear a size 10, right? I'm going to assume that you may have a smaller size shoe than I do. So we don't have the same size shoes, right? So it's about understanding that we have different life stories. We have different obstacles that we have to each go through. It's about understanding that person's story, the resources that person needs. So it's about need, right? And then we have to understand the consequences and the aftermath of what we're doing. So that's kind of how I try to explain equity in terms of versus equality. Two different things. Champion equity. Then obviously there's diversity. You need different types of representation, and people have the argument where you can't be what you do not see. But I do argue that sometimes, like, people do have to get to a certain point, even if they don't see somebody themselves, right? But ultimately, it's important. About representation is very important, right? And it's understanding the different identities and the different ways of working. And that also contributes to the workplace, right? The people who are more diverse have increased economy, increased compensation, etc. I know y'all are business people, so y'all probably know these things, right? And then, inclusion is about belonging and about making someone feel valued. And again, when we understand the diversity, we understand the needs of that person. So those all intersect. And then I always say love at the end, because I feel like we have to do things with love, harmony, and care. So love is just how we should practice these things. And I think that's very important. Lose sight of that sometimes, because sometimes we tend to be know-it-alls, right? Depending on what side you're on. I also don't like sides. I'm more of like solutions, not sides. So it's good to just consider when you practice EDI, is to practice it with love. Yeah.
I really like that. I like your explanation of equity versus equality. I have an explanation for that as well, in a way I define it. And for me, equity is that we don't start from the same starting line.
Absolutely.
And that's really important for people to understand. And if we look at the three of us on the screen, we've all started from a different starting line. And there are things that have been in our way, hurdles, roadblocks that have either pushed us forward in some way, or it's actually held us back a little bit, and we've had to navigate our way around and through that. I love the inclusion of love at the end, because it's all about love and kindness at the end of the day, and we understand each other more if we do see it from that lens.
Yes, and that's kind of like I think my personal experience is is definitely what shaped that, which we'll probably get into later down the episode. But I definitely agree with you. That's a great analogy. So
another thing that I would like to just clarify and give us a bit more of a definition for the audience and the listeners is rehumanisation. So tell us what rehumanisation actually means and why you've formed that brand.
Okay, so my argument, some people agree, some people don't agree, right? In the academic world, it's quite challenging because there's so many different perspectives and people question everything, right? And it's a good thing, but at the same time, sometimes I feel like it's okay to be simple for everyone to understand something. So I just take it in terms of the system that is currently in place. We argue that it creates certain prejudices and biases towards other people. Right? So for instance, I give a prime example in terms of my hair, right? In certain institutions, this is not allowed, right? People, kids get suspended for wearing locks, afros, etc. Right? That then creates certain biases and stereotypes towards a certain identity and a certain form of, you can call it politics, a certain form of blackness. When we think about rehumanization, it's about understanding that what are current policies in place that are creating those biases, right? Towards, at least say for instance, towards black people. Why is it that my hair is quote unquote anti-racist, right? Why is it going against the system? Why is it implemented that I'm not allowed to express my identity in the first place? So rehumanization, I have this is part of my podcast. This is the question I ask my vibers who are guests, and I see it as something that we all have to do. We all have been influenced in some shape or form by something. We've all had some type of bias or prejudice or stereotypes. And I just look at it as something that everyone, every human should strive to do. And there is no blueprint to it. We all have our own story that we have to navigate to continue to rehumanize. And I say rehumanizing is a process. So it's not something that is static. It is something that you're continually doing. So I argue, and people say it could be humanization as well, but I argue rehumanization because the prefix re is to do again, to start over, or to keep going, right? So either way, it's really important to always question, always be curious, like you've mentioned, and be open to difference. Because I learned through my journey that I was homophobic, I was different things, and I realized that being part of a marginalized group does not excuse me from being a bigot, right? Also being a part of a patriarchy. So it's important for different people to understand that, and that's kind of what. That's how I would kind of describe it.
For me, listening to the words you're saying and how important they are culturally and across different types of cultures and diversity, it comes to the same thing. Like for me, it always comes down to love. And I think that was very prevalent in what you mentioned earlier on, how equity, diversity, inclusion with love. And I think for all of us, it's just with love. We talking about it a lot in our business. We try to be heart-led. And when you approach life with that lens of love or that heart-led approach, do you find that you face obstacles with that?
Absolutely. What comes to my mind right now is a relationship, because I'm with a white Austrian woman. So but I consider myself a pan-humanist, a pan-Africanist, right? So I'm for black empowerment. So people tell me, well, how can you be with a white woman if you're fighting for this, and this, right? And I look at it as in terms of seeing everyone for themselves. I look at the core, look at the center. I kind of sometimes separate love and like, as to be simple. Like we should love everybody, but we don't have to like everybody. That's how I look at it sometimes. Just play in terms of I can have love for you, but I maybe not want to be around you that much, I'm just joking. But I would just say that in the work that I do, I have this term. It's called, I say everyone has to matter, right? So, there's this whole movement about Black Lives Matter, and people say, oh, all lives matter, right? But then I realized when I was during my research, doing my PhD, I was in a racial training session. I was just observing. I was part of it. It was on a Zoom call. And one of the questions was, let's say somebody put something racist in the chat. What do you do? Everyone is just kind of unsure. Everyone's thinking. Everyone's asking questions. Everyone, at the end of the day, the perpetrator is saying something racist. However, it's showing that the perpetrator matters, because you have to kind of think about, you have to be strategic with how you approach that person, right? So for me, to have these conversations, it's important for other people to be open, because how can you know some other people's prejudices if they're not open? We see it now with Trump. We see how everyone's coming out and how they're with their certain attitudes, whether it's sexist, racist attitudes, xenophobic attitudes. And I think those things are important, because it's if you shelter people, if people feel sheltered and can't be open, then we can't have that dialogue. It's about having the dialogue and about how we can come to a solution. Right. And that's why I say everyone has to matter. And it's important to lead with love, like you said. So when you see that, and that's what goes back to my approach about dehumanization, about the system, about how the system kind of creates how we view the world. So it's important for people to sit down and listen and approach each other with love. And the pushback with that is, well, why should we do that, right? If this person's racist, well, they should have consequences. I'm not saying that that's not the case. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be held accountable, because the system currently is really hard to hold people accountable. And I think that's the main challenge, but it's still important to see that person as human and challenge the system, challenge what they're doing. But it's best to try to do it in a loving way. And there's different approaches to that. I don't know how y'all feel.
It's important to have the conversation and allow the conversation to flourish, even if you disagree. That's kind of like what you were saying before, right? You can love somebody or you can give love, but you don't have to like them. And it's the same with having these types of conversations. We need to open up each other's perspectives of the world and see it from a different lens, because there are certain things that occur. So, for example, in Australia and the UK, I know we've got the same kind of discontent at the moment. And a lot of it is boiling down to racism and nationalism. And instead of people actually fighting against the real causes and the root causes of their discontent, which is usually politics, structures, issues that aren't being addressed, they're actually fighting against each other. And a lot of that's perpetuated by the media as well. And it kind of bubbles up. But if we kind of squash the conversation down to only one side's allowed to voice it versus the other, then we don't have that balance, and we can't kind of rebalance that humanization of people.
Right, exactly. And that's what's been my challenge in terms of being out of place. I don't know if I'm going too ahead right now, but that, in terms of like, I come from a certain background, like Paul, and I don't know did you play any sports, or were you an athlete at all, or no?
Nope.
That's okay. But I know Paul, like in basketball, right, there is this hyper masculinity, right, that comes with playing certain sports, right? That's just there. Like, even like homophobic dialogue is there, sexist attitudes are there, and you kind of go with that, or you learn as a young person to like kind of like know how to navigate that. But then when you get to my world, in terms of like academia, in terms of being an active person in the community, I see that people have a certain attitude where they need to have more progressive views, and it's like that's just not how the world works. Like, there's so many people who don't have those views, and it's important to try to dialogue and reflect and then act. So, yeah. And to your point, you're right. There's a platform called Solution Not Sides, and I'm really for that, and that's how we can move forward. But yeah, that's why it's challenging in terms of the work that I do, because you have on one side where I was an athlete, and it's just like nobody really cares. You just want to hoop, or you just want to focus on that, or you want to focus on just the smaller things or whatever, and just go through life. And then you have the other side where people are extremely progressive, if that's what you want to call it, or trying to challenge this populist rhetoric or these racist rhetoric. So I understand that's what we need to do, but there's different ways I view that we could be approaching that.
Yeah. And I guess like there's different levels to it, right? There is conscious bias where people are actively aware of what they're doing and what they're saying, even if it's coming from conditioned behaviors. But then there's subconscious bias. And Anne and I have sat in a few podcasts now where I sit here as a white man, and within me there is subconscious bias. And the only way to transition that is through something you mentioned before, right? It's about curiosity. It's about being curious about it and then building awareness about it. So I know a lot of the work you're doing is actually, raising awareness about this, educating people. Because even through our pre-chat, you took us through a timeline, which was very interesting. I don't know if you want to just touch on that briefly, because for me, like, I didn't have awareness of that. I found it extremely interesting.
Okay, so yes, of course. So I have a timeline. His name, I need to shout out his name, but I think it was Obi. It's a British person, not a scholar, just a teacher. And it's a timeline from 5000 BC to past 2050s. And basically it's an African timeline. It kind of gives, it's a world timeline as well, but it's specific, more predominantly an African timeline in terms of the history that Africans have contributed into the world. Dr. Anthony Browder has a great point in terms of, he talks about how in history we learn basically the periods of enslavement, which started around 1619, right? So it's a 400 history so far. So, and that's also important too, to understand that for people like me, we were enslaved longer than we've been free. And that's very important to understand. However, that is just one page of a 100-page book of our history. there's so many other things that we have done in terms of contributions, in terms of how other people see the world. But I guess with racism, and racist scholars have denounced what we've done, right, or appropriated what a lot of my ancestors have done. And that's kind of, again, shaped how we view certain groups. I started off during my PhD, I thought people who are white pretty much invented most things, right? Technology. I thought they were the initiators of civilization in the world. And I had learned quite quickly that that's not the case. So in terms of the timeline, it's just a really long, it's on my walls, very long. And it's just a brief history about what different people have contributed to the world. And when you also realize that 800 BC was the first European book, but there's thousands of years before that Africans were doing way more things, books, pyramids, etc. So it's important to, that's stuff that we don't learn in schools, and that's stuff that they're trying to now keep, not just remove, or because it's never, most of it was never there, right? And they're also trying to remove stuff during slavery. So that's the battle at the moment. I'm sure it's happening in Australia as well as it's happening in the UK and other parts of the West in America.
You talked about like the appropriation of, innovation and appropriation of, contributions as well. What we're seeing from a business lens is AI has biases inherent in it.
No,
because the information that it's aggregating and it's researching and it's pulling from has either minimized or are totally made obsolete the contributions of people from marginalized backgrounds. And so now we're seeing that coming through in terms of how it actually starts to aggregate and share information. And people are just, if they trust AI and the information that it's actually sharing with them, then that just continues to perpetuate this position where people aren't actually hearing or seeing or viewing the truth. But also from a prompting perspective, if you're prompting based on your own perspective, you're not actually getting a diverse view either. So there's going to be a huge, I think, groundswell in terms of change that we need to actually implement when it comes to AI and the information that is provided to us and shared with us. But there's also a big conversation around ethics with it as well. So we won't get into that today.
Yeah, but you made a great point about prompting, because you can, now with this information you can find basically most things to suit what you believe in, right? Even if it's not true, you can find different sources to kind of try to prove your point, which is also difficult.
AI, for example, a little example that Paul and I did was we were trying to come up with little avatars for this podcast. So we tried different AI tools, and what we found was that it would kind of picture Paul as he is there, but for me it made me less Asian. Okay. And it made me kind of pan something. And I found that quite funny, because then I tested with a friend of mine, and he came back and went, you kind of look like you're Middle Eastern in this photo, you look a little bit Italian in that one. Like AI is really kind of de-Asianing you at the same time.
Oh wow, okay. Wow. How'd you feel about that?
I was taken back when I first saw it, when I saw what it came out with, because when I looked at my friend's avatar versus mine, his looked like him, represented him. And actually what I found was they represented men in a more masculine kind of way. And for the women, it gave us more refined, demure features. Will it learn, and will it start to understand, different ethnicities? Will it start to bring that information through? I hope so. But it comes down to who is actually governing all that.
It's the potential of just creating more bias and more conditioning, because I'm sure each platform is very different. It's like a newspaper, right? Each newspaper tries to get propaganda, tries to get to believe in something different. And I'm sure that's going to happen with AI, whether it's conscious or unconscious. It's certainly a danger, especially if we're getting a lot of our information and knowledge from there.
Absolutely. I talked about this in my PhD, kind of this idea about evaluative conditioning, and how when you put, obviously I did race, so when you put words and colors together, like if I say black inferiority, or like if I say white supremacy, you're also associating whiteness with supremacy, right? So then when you wonder why certain people walking around acting superior, that's why I don't use those terms. So it's, or we talk about, if we say black is bad, black is darkness, black is associated with the devil. So you have these different ways of knowing of terms, right? And it's like, and it disrupts our ways of thinking, or conditions us to, like you said, Paul, to feel a certain way. And like you mentioned about what does masculine and feminine look like, femininity look like, right? Is it just subscribed to males, females, so it's important to kind of, that's, again, a new system that we think is progressive is actually still keeping us moving backwards, or even just in the same situation. Because like I said, on the timeline, which you mentioned before, my ancestors, we could say our ancestors, because we all, in my opinion, we all come from Africa. That's the science, what science tells us. We come from a black woman. But masculine and feminine didn't subscribe you to how what you were born with, right? And that's why I say they, he, because I completely challenge and disagree with the Western binary, period. So that's why my pronouns are they, he. So yeah.
We've been conditioned to this belief of what masculine and feminine is, what man and women are. And, it comes down to the way that we dress. And even in today's society, for women, there is this constant battle in terms of what you need to look like. And that is constantly being pushed to us through media. It's being pushed through social media. It's going from, you need to be super thin, like, heroin chic back in the 80s and 90s. And then it was like, okay, be happy and accepting of yourself today. And then now it's, with these GLP-1s coming through that are being promoted by celebrities too, which are telling us that, well, how you look and how you are is not acceptable. So you need to change that, and you need to keep up to date with the trends that are happening around how you should even look and present yourself.
I agree with that. How do you feel about that, Paul?
I was going to say we all carry masculinity and femininity. And what has generally happened, as we've grown up, men have been told to be more masculine, i.e., if you show your vulnerability, if you show your emotions, you're weak. But that's completely acceptable for women. But the dangers that has had on the mental health of society in general, because if a male is struggling with mental health, there's likely someone around them who's been impacted by that as well. There shouldn't be any separation. It's for me, it's one thing, and whatever way we look at it, in whatever your belief system is, whether it's religion, whether it's spirituality, essentially we all do come from the same thing. And essentially what that thing is, for my definition anyway, is we come from love, and we're here to love. But unfortunately, there are so many things put in front of us as we're evolving through life that really can pull us away from that love. If we all walked around with just that ability to hold compassion and empathy for other people, just people, not classifying people by the colour of their skin, by their sex, by their religion, by their interests, by whatever it is, just classify people as one, and it could really make a big difference and support the coming together of the human race, right? And that kind of leads me to my next question we talked about. And you've built a platform that is about rehumanization. In yourself, you've been through some different transitions from an athlete to the work that you do now, and through challenging your identity and learning about your identity. So when we talk about rehumanization, could you share with us about yourself? So when you've been rehumanizing yourself, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to identity, what have you had to work through in that journey?
Ooh, we could be here all day for that. I'll try to break it down. I'll just start with my PhD. It's kind of what we mentioned before about how when I started, I thought a certain group of people were the initiators, the people who were the gateway, right? Or people who are white were the people who created civilization, or etc., or advanced it in a certain way. And when you have that perspective, you see yourself differently, right? And when you don't know your history, it's difficult to move in a certain way, right? I have it in my notes still, because I showed in my lectures these notes that I have. I said, just because white people are, created these types of things doesn't mean they're allowed to treat us this way. I said this is during my PhD. It shows the growth that I've had considering this conversation, right? And during that process, COVID happened. So COVID happened in the second year of my PhD, was what people would say is one of the most important years, like towards the end of it, because that's when you kind of do your field work. So I was fortunate enough to do my field work right before we went into lockdown in England. And during that time, I had so much time on my hands to just do my own thing. Even though that's a lot of what the PhD is, but there's no more basketball. It's just inside reading, and I call them VMs, virtual mentors. So learning from different Afro scholars on YouTube and learning more about my history. Because when you learn your history, you erase the mystery. And I got that from Dr. Small. I got that from Professor Small. From Mr. Smalls, I won't take that credit for that one, but that's what he always says. And I started to learn my history. And once I learned my history about what we created, what we did, how certain things were appropriated, misinterpreted, and how we've been misguided in the things that we believe, but for my journey, for what I believe. And that transformed me spiritually. So I used to be a Christian. I'm no longer a Christian. I am African spiritualist. My principles are Ma'at. It's very similar in a way, but when you grow up seeing a white Jesus most of your life, you view God differently, right? And again, it goes back to the conditioning and normalization about what you see as God, right? I make this joke about, like, say, Santa Claus, right? I do this in some of my classes and lecture in terms of kids are seeing Santa Claus, this big white man coming and giving you gifts that your parents worked hard to get, right? But you're seeing this person, right? That is this figure who is doing so much for you, right? Again, it's that normalization of who we should look up to, right? Even when it comes to characters. But to keep back to the question, but yet for me, that journey, learning my history and understanding that what I believed in wasn't necessarily who I was, or wasn't who I was at all. And I felt it limited me as a person and it limited my growth. Specifically, I know people have their own religious belief, but when I was a Christian, that value system disrupted who I was as a human, right? It wasn't in my center. It wasn't really what I believed in. Like I said, there's certain ideas, certain practices, and then I stayed a Christian because I was homophobic at once. Because my reason was always, it's because God or Jesus, the Bible says this, that. And then I realized, okay, the Bible can be interpreted differently. I still believed in it. And then I transformed, and I realized, or I learned that from my experience, I learned from researching that much of the Bible stems from African stories. At least that's my interpretation. That's what I've seen. That's what I've researched. So I started to change, and I have a different value system. So now I'm an African spiritualist. And again, it's like you said, Paul, people can believe what they want to believe in, but again, it's about allowing others to be themselves and being able to express themselves how they feel in a loving way, right? So yeah, and learning my history and learning those things helped me write my work. It helped me move forward, and it helped me bring a completely different perspective in the research that I do. Because much of the research that I do in critical race research, a lot of it is it's really negative, right? It's really it's important because you're raising awareness in terms of experiences, but I would find that 90%, 95% of critical race research papers were, not belonging, not being included, racial microaggressions, which is like slight cuts, like, say, for instance, oh, you can read well for a black person, or you're blah, 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 right? So it was those types of experiences and narratives, which is important to highlight. But for my PhD, I wanted to bring something different. And part of how I interpreted my data was to kind of to express and write down what people were experiencing. But it was more to understand why that was happening, right? And that's why I focus a lot on targets and perpetrators of different forms of discrimination. And I tried to I want people to use my research in a way to write their own story and understand what they've been through. And that's kind of like what I went through. And then I use a power threat meaning framework. A lot of it is around just power. How's your power being disrupted? Or what is your power? The meaning, what meaning do you make of it? And what is the threat? What is your threat response when something makes you feel uncomfortable? If someone says something to you, if you're uncomfortable with it, why is that? Why is it what is disrupting you? How are you responding to that threat? They got the fight or freeze. And then how do you navigate that? How do you move forward with that? And that's I want people to understand their own stories. It's not about me writing their stories. This is a tool. There's tools that I use for people to navigate themselves. And that's been my journey. And that's where I'm at. It's not about telling people, because a lot of my previous beliefs is about telling people what you need to believe and telling people how they need to be. Now it's more about asking questions and just allowing people to find themselves.
Would it be right in saying it's advocating for self-discovery in an empowering way? So I know that, some of the work you do at the college you work at, and I know that you've been going to events that look at, supporting students, supporting people who suffering, marginalized, or they are suffering from inequalities through both an educational lens and a kind of societal lens. So is that the kind of space? So you've kind of been through your personal journey with it. You've been through your out of place moments, right? And it's not to say that, you'll never feel out of place ever again, like we always will do. But now through what you've discovered, you've been able to step into a position where you've challenged the status quo. You've been through that journey. But now you're kind of creating that foundation and that safe space for others to express and explore.
Yeah, yes, I agree. I work, and I've expressed this before. Like, I work at the Rainbow College. I've been explaining this interview. Like, I was homophobic. If this was 6 years ago, I would be like, what? Like, no. Like, you know what I mean? I would have been like, no. But now it's like, I'm a completely different person. You would never have, and that's another reason why you got to take people where they are and move with them, not for them, but move with them, right? We need to move with each other. And in the college, that's what I try to do. Is a lot of my work is around student enrichment. It's about trying to put on certain types of events. It's about trying to make sure I'm also kind of like the manager of the college in a way. We try our best not to have a hierarchy. We try to move horizontal, but obviously our principal makes executive decisions. But in a way, we try to make everyone be able to contribute in different ways, and there is no. We try our best not to have a hierarchy, despite being in a elitist university, what people would say. And also our university is very low on EDI, so we're not the best at that either. So it's important for the work that I do is very important, and then I still try to teach and do research as well for the university, like different reports and stuff. Like right now I'm doing a report on students who are doing a PhD and how their relationship is with their supervisors from students from racially minoritized backgrounds. So I've been starting the interviews, and yeah, it's been telling. A lot of our experiences are quite similar. Some are different, but yeah, again, a lot of what I do is just to support everyone, and do that from using my ethos.
You mentioned something around hierarchy, and obviously a very surface level thing for me to say here, but the world is built around hierarchy. And if that hierarchy was to be removed, who knows what would happen? So in your circumstance at the college where you say you try not to work on a hierarchical kind of perspective, is that something that's been implemented since you were there? Did you get to experience the transition of that?
Well, my principal, Susan Frank, she's amazing. She's been a principal for about 14 years. I hope I don't get that wrong, but I think it was 2007. Was when she was acting up, but then officially I think it was 2011 or 2010. But she's amazing. She does a lot of stuff with refugee work. She does a lot of stuff for the wider community. She was a linguist, so she speaks like 5 languages. She used to teach, and she started the culture. And for me, it's important because I'm kind of the face at times. I'm there a lot more than she is. I'm walking around, so it's important to me to continue that value system. And I think a lot of it is around being approachable, allowing colleagues, no matter what grade they are, we allow each other to have a dialogue. I try to be open. If someone has an issue with what I said or what I did, they can come into my office. They talk to me about it. I apologize. We go back and forth, and then I give hugs. We move on, right? And I think that's been the best. That's been the best thing. I mean, it's worked so far. Even if we don't agree, if I don't agree with something, we agree to disagree with certain things, and that happens when you have dialogue or when you confront each other. So, but ultimately, people are allowed to move the way they want to move. You want to be comfortable in your workspace, right? And you don't want to feel that you're in isolation. You want to be able to work with everyone in the most authentic way possible, and that's pretty much what we try to do. And the culture I try to set within our college.
You spoke before about your transition in terms of your spiritual and faith practice. When you did that, and this is regarding like feeling out of place, do you feel that when you were going through that transition that you felt out of place, or did you feel out of place beforehand and you didn't feel aligned, and that's why you started that transition and really kind of doing that introspection and self-reflection?
Y'all have some great questions. I tell y'all that. Y'all have some really good questions. To be honest, I actually still feel out of place with certain people. I can be honest and say my family in particular, many are not really, don't know how to respond to me now that I have a certain value system. right? But when I started that journey, I kind of kept it to myself. I was slowly kind of put it out there that I was changing my viewpoints, and then it kind of just got out. I have a big family, or I know people, so it just kind of got out. Christopher's not a Christian no more, so it's like, but yeah, I think it's been challenging. I'll say that for sure. With many people I'm close to, people don't know how to respond to it, because essentially, I'll be honest, like if you aren't, like the rhetoric is, if you don't believe in Jesus, you're gonna go to hell. All right. So, and if you don't believe in Jesus, you're pretty much the competition. Some people see it that way. Some people try to say, oh, it's loving. But in reality, if you're saying that if you don't believe in this person, you're not going to go, the afterlife is like a reward system that you're not going to get, but I'm going to get, kind of type thing. At least that's the spirituality that I grew up in. The different people have different ways of thinking, interpreting the Bible. So yeah, I've had to navigate it on my own for the most part, to be honest, with my partner as well a bit, and that's okay. I mean, well, it's not okay, but I've learned to navigate it in the best way I can, and I'm still, my loving self, and I try my best to continue to love others, even the people I feel have kind of been silent towards me, right? So. And I see myself as a better person. I see myself as a better human being. So I'm like, y'all missing out. So it is what it is. That's kind of how I look at it as well. You're missing out. That's why I say so. Yeah, it is. That's kind of like where I'm at now. So that's how I try to move. So yeah.
Yeah, I like how you still move with love, and I do find religion quite an interesting thing, because at the core of it, everyone's religion does talk about love, and it talks about community. And it talks about respect. And yet when you don't have the same belief system as somebody else who's very headstrong in that particular faith that they have, there is this division that occurs. And it's kind of unfortunate that people can't see beyond that we can't just accept each other for who we are and what we believe in, and go back to what you've spoken about at the start, which is, just centered around love, acceptance, compassion, empathy for others, rather than using faith as a divisive tool.
Yeah, you're right.
Imagine how much we could enhance the experience of life. And this is obviously just a personal opinion, right? Imagine how much we could enhance the experience of life for individuals if we respected and accepted that we have different values. But instead of kind of becoming disconnected because of those values, we actually connect more. And we can actually start to grow from that position. Think about the change we could create in the world.
You're right. And that's why I said that value system, I took the parts of it that I felt was allowing me to be human, or myself, or more loving, being myself. And yeah, part of being, like you said in the beginning, part of being human is being curious, allowing others to be themselves, and allowing people to move in a certain way. And I think that's like what you mentioned, and it's sometimes we restrict ourselves, and it's important to move in a way where we can all be enhance ourselves. Yeah, and I'm not saying this is for everybody, whoever believes in whatever, but it's just from my experience and the people that I've dealt with. That's what I've gone through.
We've covered right a lot. We've covered, I guess the transitions and transformations you've been through with your identity, with your spirituality, with understanding your, I guess in my words, your blueprint, going back way beyond the average educational kind of booklets tell you. But for you, just to get a real kind of value to finish with, what's one value you hold that others might not see as strategic, but you refuse to compromise on?
Maybe can I extend on the everyone has to matter?
Absolutely.
That's the value I hold. And it's like we've talked about this entire time. Like when you mentioned about enhancing, about love, and about dialogue, and about rehumanization. To me, everyone has to matter, and I look, and the value is rehumanization. Not everyone agrees with that, but I feel like that has to be, in my position, that is a position that we should definitely take, because it makes us reflect on ourselves. But this everyone has to matter approach, I mean, Something recently happened about, I don't know if y'all seen Charlie Kirk. And yeah, his value system is completely opposite of mine. I feel like there's certain things that he said that is very problematic, right? He does have a family, he has kids. So you have to, in certain instances, you have to see, you have to be kind in a way. And I just think that everyone has to matter. That's my value system. And like I said, some people may agree, some people may not. Some people think, they deserve that or they've earned that. But I just think that if we move in a way where we see everyone, like you said, Paul, you're a white man. Yeah. But you've had certain experiences that I haven't had and hasn't had, and that are very traumatic. And it's something that if I just take you for your physical appearances, I won't know what you've been through, right? I won't know these things. So it's important to approach people where they are and understand that not everyone's going to have the same value system either. So that everything underpins that when it comes to everyone has to matter. So that's where I'm at. And that allows me to move in ways where I feel much of our society should at least attempt. We should at least start attempting to move with others and be loving and kind to others, and not expecting everyone to hold the same value system, not expecting everyone to move how we move, just allowing people to find their journey themselves. And that's what y'all are doing. And I'm proud of both of y'all for what y'all are doing. This is amazing. But yeah, I think that's pretty much what I do. And while doing that, I talk about flipping the script. So flipping the script is to reverse a situation and deviate from the norm. So we talked all today about stuff that's been normalized, and part of me feels like the majority rhetoric is around dehumanizing in a way. Then normalization is part of that is being dehumanized. AI. We talked about research. We talked about education, spirituality. A lot of that stuff is not allowing us to be fully human, right? And it's important to do again, start over sometimes, and look at ourselves and look at our own insecurities in order to move forward. Because I think I was telling Ann, it's like we're moving backward to stay backwards, and that's where we're at right now. That's sad. That's really sad. And but hey, at least people are able to express themselves. At least we know. That's why I remember when Trump was elected, I was not surprised. I already knew he was going to be elected. So I was like, if you didn't know that, we need to look at the history a bit more. We're not being taught the history that we need to be taught. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
That is a beautiful way to wrap up. That everyone has to matter. For those who want to catch Christopher's podcast, it is the Rehumanisation Station, which is on Spotify, YouTube, and Buzzsprout, where they interview people in any organisation doing transformative work.
Thanks for listening to Out of Place. If something in today's episode resonated with you, let us know or share it with someone who might need it too.
If you can, leave us a review on Apple, rating on Spotify, or even a like on YouTube. We also have a deep dive into each topic on Substack as well, so you can find us over there. We're so grateful to be building this alongside you. And to learn more or to connect with us, you can find us on Instagram at Out of Plaece.
Here's to finding your way, even when it feels a little out of place. We'll see you on the next episode.